Hey everybody, how you doing? And once again, we're back. Actually, roughly 2 days because today is Thursday. After the Tuesday,
Everybody, how you doing? And
City
once again,
Council,
we're back. Actually, roughly 2 days because today is Thursday.
and I'm with my friend Mike Jacob. Mike, how's your Thursday going?
Can't complain. Keep them
On,
busy.
yeah, on a day that in sports saw the Raiders hire the first black female president. So now, regarding Howard Terminal and the outcome, Mike, as you know, is the PMSA lawyer of great work. Mike, what were your thoughts about the city council hearing that went that in perfect Oakland fashion? I have to note this started at for me something like 12:30 at night, uh, and it reminded me because that's only 3 hours ahead. It reminded me of how the city treated Ronnie Lott and the Lott Group when they were working on the Raiders stadium proposal. And they came to council, and Lynette Gitz McElhaney was presiding over the council for that session. And the whole thing started at 5:30. Ronnie Lott didn't see the podium until 10 o'clock that night. Excuse me, 10:30. And I was sitting at the press table right in front of them and kept looking back and just going, "Hey, sorry about this." And I was actually texting Lynette saying, "Why are you doing this?" And look, I get that. Let me put it this way: I get there are people who want to send the message that sports aren't important and all that stuff, but from my view, I think it's both anti-intellectual and racist. And the reason why I say that is because there are certain elected officials that say they're not into sports, and certain people, and they say it as some way of building this Rutland of thought that just happens to be anti-black in terms of the recognition of the number of African Americans that are involved in sports on many levels and the importance of sports to the African American community. So I really look at that whole comment and that behavior with a jaundiced eye because had this been the CEO of Kaiser, the CEO of Kaiser would not have been made to wait until 10:30 at night. In any case, you know, and so it just shows for me, um, and I didn't mean to go on this longer than I did, but it really bothered me why we're in the situation with all of our teams and why they've left in general. But having said that, what did you think of the hearing?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, with respect to the outcome, we're disappointed, but not unexpected. Um, and I think the most interesting components of that were the discussion that was had about um, the timing, right, and the idea that a public vote might actually be appropriate if we had more details. I heard Warren Taylor essentially saying he was endorsing a referendum, which I couldn't believe when I heard that. Um, and But then I thought the responses from Councilman Kalb and Tao were, reasonable. Coming back and saying, I want to see the details, but I'm open to asking the public what they think about them, is not a no in my book. It's a very strong response to the city staff, to let them know that they don't have an open checkbook. Um, so I thought that was encouraging. Obviously with the buildup, and you've seen it, and we had a conversation about it as well. A whole lot of the focus seemed to be on whether or not people liked our mail leading up to it, or whether or not they thought that um, us talking about the total amount of potential public subsidy was misleading in some way, and obviously, that's unfortunate because it's not, but it is what it is. The more important thing was, I think, when you looked at the real cross section of Oakland, and you asked people, did they want to have a voice? The overwhelming number of folks that were commenting were saying that they still wanted to be engaged in that process, and that's important.
This, Matthew Green brings up a question. I think that's better than anything I've thought of, and it did go to my mind. Here he asks, why couldn't they amend the language of the ballot measure if the council didn't like it?
Yeah, well, I think this goes to your initial point. It's a great question. Why did that entire council meeting have to take 12 hours? And the reason why is because, well, as you know, the timing of these council meetings prior to the date that you need to get something on the ballot lends itself to these marathon meetings where everything gets put over to the last minute. Even the other measures that weren't voted on that got put over to the very last day, which would be next Monday, the 11th.
Yeah.
The city attorney's office was busy warning the council, we might not be able to get there in time if you're delaying any further. And so you don't have time for refinements or amendments at that point. You are stuck with what you got. The other thing about the ballot measure language was, to some of the criticism is you really couldn't ask a question other than what was asked, because there are no details. So, to the extent that puts us, I think, in a potentially bad position with respect to the timing, it does, and that's unfortunate. But at the same time, we also felt that was potentially helpful in driving the conversation, because you would be presenting a ballot question, obviously, in the context of where do you think this deal is going to be in November? And if they stuck to their timeline, they have a financial analysis that's done, ready for the council meeting on September 20th. Who knows if that holds firm, but presuming it does, there's more than enough time to actually demonstrate to the public what's actually at stake. Time to give folks who, like we've had this discussion before, are genuinely and bona fide advocates of the role of a public subsidy in the context of whether it's tax increment financing, other grants, to make that case. But that obviously isn't going to happen. That's just not going to be part of the debate in November.
Barry Lee was asking, he says, I don't understand how the council is going all over the place instead of following their own laid out agenda. You thought they were all, I don't know if I thought they were all over the place, but did you get that impression, Mike?
I think he might be, referring to the fact that they had those set orders of business. So they would start the meeting and then they'd move to something else and then they'd come back to it. And then, you have
right.
public comments, and I think that is frustrating for people. You can't, even if you're in this business, right? I mean, you can't plan your day around a 12-hour meeting and expect to actually have some certainty about what's happening. Unfortunately, in a lot of these instances, you could set more times for set orders of business, right? And you could give people better estimates. At the same time, I think some of this is COVID related too, because the way that we've set these things up for remote hearing is you're not receiving comments on every item at the time the item's up. Everybody is commenting at once on everything. There's no rhyme or reason to it, that is not an ideal way to run that process. But no, I agree. I think I was getting texts and emails from people, wondering if stuff had already happened and they missed it. What is this now? And I think it's hard to follow if you're not really sitting down and paying close attention to it.
Yeah, I thought what bothered me. Oh, well, I'll say this. I thought what bothered me, and I have to take Barry's comment from the perspective of Barry not being a regular council watcher and me being an insider who worked for 2 mayors in City Hall, who is used to that process. I mean, there were council meetings back when I was working for Elihu that went on until 3 a.m. And we always used to joke about hitting Agenda 99, which is the golden bear. And we were lamenting that we would never be able to get to Agenda 99 because, Agenda 99 had closed by 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right? So, and we were still there.
Yeah.
But, you work for the city of Oakland for a number of years and you get used to that. But I'm always mindful of the fact that the public comes first. And let's face it, the majority of people, they're paying attention to that particular council date, that particular meeting, that hearing. We're there for this issue and nothing else. And so it's disrespectful to them and to their kids who are interested in the future of the A's, to have them just waiting around and then be exposed to this common scheduling chaos that the council throws out there, right?
Right.
And I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I just say I think it's exceptionally hard when you have a large number of speakers too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and gargantuan. Yeah, they didn't handle it right at all, and it's because of this also Oakland thing that we like to do of saying, hey, you're not more important than this subject about this, and this, and this. And to me, we're not going to be a better city until we get over what I call this crab barrel idea that we got to pull everybody down and make them, see their place and get their place in line. And because it hasn't worked for us as a city, the city has not gotten better with that mentality. It's only gotten worse. That's just my view. Hey, speaking of better and worse, I want your comment on No Guile's blast of Lauren Taylor. I thought was absolutely hilarious. I'll play it for you right now. This was from that same meeting. Excuse me. This is the right one. Here it is. And make sure the volume is up. It is, and here we go.
Madam President, if there's no one else,
That's No Guile, District 5 Council.
Okay, I do see Councilmember Taylor with his hand up. Go ahead, Councilmember.
Okay, I was waiting on somebody else to go, but I'll go ahead and jump in with my thoughts. So I definitely hear those who express their concern there around being able to have a say in a vote and be a part of the process. I want to acknowledge that staff have done a significant amount of engagement already and in many different forums across the city through the community benefits process and so many others that I've been able to be a part of, and many that I haven't been able to be a part of just because there's been so much. I also hear that there's a
you'll see results in your very first week, just like me. This is me 40 pounds ago,
commercial,
and I'm never going to say that. They gave me everything I need.
No, if you want to just pause.
I wanted to acknowledge that there are some of those who are against having a vote that were saying, hey, well, residents can't, are unable to assess all of the details and the nuance of the project. And I wanted to wholeheartedly disagree with that and acknowledge that we've got some very smart, intelligent residents here in Oakland that absolutely can do as good of a job as we are doing on the council in terms of going through all the details and data and everything else. to me, the issue is that the current ballot measure is worded. It's worded as a terrible question. It's extremely vague. It doesn't provide any real value or information that will be helpful in an advisory capacity. So yeah, wholeheartedly disagree that with the public speakers that said our residents are unable to assess the details and the nuance of the project. I believe that, our educated Oakland voters are not stupid. The ballot question is stupid. It's dumbed down in a way that is confusing, non-specific, uninformative. And I think the one commenter had it right. Based on the current question, we don't know if a voter is voting against Dave Cavill and John Fisher. They're voting against moving the A's from the Coliseum. They're voting against having 35% affordable housing instead of 50% affordable housing. They're voting against the use of condominium transfer fees to fund a portion of the community benefits or that. And that level of just not being specific is going to be very uninformative. It's not going to help us out. And we're going to be in a worse off situation at the end if this is what moves forward. If there was a survey or a ballot measure advisory, whatever you want to call it, for me to be supportive of it, it would have to be very targeted and specific in terms of highlighting the deal terms and having that be the question and not the backup materials if someone were to double click or read through a pamphlet, that sort of thing. And so the things that would need to be in the question that are asked are, the amount of City of Oakland revenues that are committed to the project that would exist regardless of whether the project were to happen, the amount of City of Oakland revenues committed to the project that would only exist if the project were to be completed, the amount of city dollars at risk if the revenues come in lower than projected, the amount of affordable housing units that are committed to be developed, both on-site and off-site, the amount of construction jobs that will be created, the amount of ongoing jobs that will be created, the amount of current tax revenues from Howard Terminal coming to the City of Oakland, and the amount of annual tax revenues that will be coming to the City of Oakland upon project completion. None of that detail is in the question, which means that it's not going to be an informed answer, not because we don't have, intelligent residents, but because we're not actually framing the question in a way that will be informative and helpful. And so that, to me, is the concern with what we have. As is, I would not be able to support this measure. If there was a much more thorough question, perhaps, but I did want to just be on the record that we're not setting ourselves up for success with what's proposed, and that's my fear and concern with respect to what's being proposed.
So Zenny, before we get
I'm Russ Ruffino, and if you're
we freeze that for a second and react?
yeah,
Because then comes the Lauren's part. I mean, that was Lauren's part, but then comes Noel's part. You want to hear Noel's part next?
oh no, I remember that.
It's pretty funny. Why don't we just play all as one, just so people can get the whole enchilada?
Yeah.
Let's do that, because then that's I think that gives it a bigger you get a whole enchilada. Google is controlling the ad part of it, folks. So let me see.
coach, consultant, expert, author, or speaker, I have just one question for you.
All right, skip ad.
Councilmember Gallo?
Yes, I'd like to respond to that. Again, I understand what is being said, but Lauren, but you have to recognize we've been at this for years. We just didn't start this negotiation and planning. So you want to keep delaying it, more talk. Even the African American Sports and Entertainment Group. The African American Sports and Entertainment Group gave me resolution because there's no cooperation. That's public land that we own half, that we want to develop. Make sure that East Oakland thrives like it used to. But you want to keep talking about it. Where is the plan, city staffers? We should have had that city council. But for me, having it come from the public is the motivation to get the job done. provide the information that I requested, and that's going to get done in September. So at least Lauren Taylor will have some numbers. Because right now you don't have any. You're absolutely right. You're just talking. I can ask a million questions, but what motivated me, and thanks to Carol Fife for bringing the item, what motivated me, right now you have about, 15,000 letters that are signed. We get emails daily. We get phone calls daily from the public. Due to the fact that what's going on in your streets, Lauren Taylor, I've never seen Oakland the mess that it is today. So I want to get that job done, members of the city administration. I want to get those streets fixed. I want to get my schools open. And we don't have that information to get it done? Oh, no, let's do another study. You can do all kinds of other things. So for me, Madam Chairperson, I will make a motion to honor the request of the public, with all due respect to each one of you, to get it on the ballot that will force us to make sure that we get out there and negotiate and get the information and get the whatever it's going to cost the city taxpayers dollars, that we should have that information in front of us now. Because I have the history of the Raiders. The A's are out there negotiating with Las Vegas daily, using us to leverage more resources from Las Vegas. That's how committed they are, Lauren Taylor. And that's how committed they were going to Fremont and going to San Jose. And but anyways, with all, Madam Chairperson, I'll go ahead and leave it at that. But I'll make a motion to honor the voters' request and get it on the ballot for November. And let us do the work to make sure we have the information to vote upon. Thank you.
Okay.
And thanks for letting me play that whole thing, Mike. Because to me, if Lauren had not uttered the word stupid, I don't think, and I understand what Lauren was saying, because I happen to agree with a lot of it, but I don't think Noel would have went off like he did. And for me, and the other reason I made it was, I've covered the city council for a long time from a number of different angles, and I cannot remember a single time. There have been a lot of arguments, near fights between people like District 7 Council Member Larry Reed and Hugh Bassett over the school issue decades ago, when I thought they were going to go to blows in the council, and I had wished there were a YouTube. There was KTOP, right? Or ones I have like Destiny Brooks versus Lynette Gibson McElhaney versus Annie Campbell Washington, right? And I can go on and on and on. But in none of those exchanges have I ever heard a council member say that another council member's district looked like a mess when that person is running for mayor of Oakland. That I could not stop laughing at. And also it goes to this failure to use the various versions of enhanced infrastructure financing districts to fix our problems.
Right.
It's something I've been bugging Lauren about. I just stopped because he wasn't interested in doing anything. So for me, it was sort of a Freudian glee. Yeah, I think it's the best way to describe it. But what did you think of that? And I knew you wanted to say something about what Lauren was commenting about.
Yeah.
Please.
So I there's only so many ways to write a ballot question. What Councilman Taylor was describing, what he wanted in a ballot question, would never, ever be a ballot question. You would never have a ballot question that went on and included all these facts about everything. I mean, that's just not realistic. The way he described that, the ballot question would go on longer than the entire sample ballot. So that's not real. You have to craft the ballot question that is short and concise and is I don't remember the exact legal terminology, but essentially it has to be an honest representation of what the question is. It needs to be done by a third party. So after Noel submitted that question for consideration, it had to go to the city attorney's office. The city attorney had to review it. And so, no, there's not going to be a valid question that does what he does, what he was asking. That being said, there's absolutely no question that I think what he was advocating for, I referred to this earlier, was a referendum. He basically was saying, what I want to take to the public is all the final questions after all the details are known, and we can put all the details in front of people, and then I think we should vote on it. I'm not sure if that's what he really wants. I'm not sure if that's what he meant. So putting aside the interaction with Councilman Gallo, I just found that entire comment to be pretty strange. I mean, it's entirely fair for him to have that position and just to say, I don't think we're at a position where we have enough information to put this on the ballot yet. I don't know, what I'm going to be asking my constituents to vote on. But then coming back and calling the actual question stupid, it's not. It's a policy question. If you think the answer that you want is something that you feel uncomfortable enunciating in public, you might have that response. And if you're running for mayor, and theoretically, and that most constituents want to have a voice on an issue, and that the overall position of the city that's the most defensible politically is to just say no public money, because it takes nuance, and you have to actually be able to enunciate a good reason for a public subsidy to get one through a ballot measure. That's fine, but just be honest about it. And so, I think when people are lost for words in those types of conversations, that's when you see the type of conversation that we had, which is when someone else calls someone else's work stupid, and it isn't.
Yeah, no, it's not stupid, and I never believed that Oakland residents were not intelligent enough. My issue, as you know, has been that they've been given the wrong information. But I think this really ultimately, and I want your responses, doesn't, to my mind, and if you disagree, great. But to my mind, doesn't this point to how mismanaged the project has been? Because, because normally, as I was saying to Libby, when she went into her, in my interview Friday, when she went into her really insulting comment that, is this a job interview city, is any? And what I find insulting is they want, and I'm going to take an aside that'll last maybe 32 seconds at best, but she wants the large media just to basically be her PR and pump out what they say. But if you think about it in total, with respect to people who cover these things, there isn't a person who has any actual knowledge other than myself who on this side of the coin of how it works, or any receipts. I can say, hey, my name is down at the base of the rotunda, because it's on the plaque. You know what I'm saying? And that person doesn't want to respect that, they don't have to. That's great. It's not going to stop me from talking, but for the mayor to say, is this a job interview, or to basically poo-poo what I'm saying, I think is, and then to have the history of basically wanting to defend Jerry Brown because Jerry fired Robert Bob. When in point of fact, when Jerry fired me, he did so because I accused him of being racist, which, as Oakland City Attorney John Russo pointed out to me when he asked me to come to his office, was retaliatory, and that I could have sued the city. So my point is, the history over the way the mayor handles these things, it's personal politics. It has nothing to do with the process of getting a project done. And as I point out in her interview, I said, Ms. Mayor, where's the successor? Because you made yourself the face of this. And she acknowledged that she did. I said, so, when do we get someone to carry the torch for you? She never had an answer. She said, maybe Ed Wrightston. But and I know that in the post-strong mayor at Oakland, city administrators are come and gone, right?
Yeah.
As have their staff people.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, if we had a process that had monthly meetings where Mike Jacob was on the board, where they had meetings with your group, and where everything was in public because it was sunshine, because it was under the auspice of the Public Financing Authority, wouldn't we have been through all this by now?
Well, yeah, presumably. But let's take a step back even further and just say, the mismanagement here, I think, is reflected a lot in what you are hearing from the folks who are opposed to the ballot measure. They weren't taking the same position that you were, or other folks that were, just 100%, policy-based, disagreeing with my position, which is totally fine. They were spouting off this whole thing that there's no public money involved, there's no public decision, the A's aren't going to be asking for a single thing. And that's just not true either. The fact is that there needs to be an honest and informed discussion about what's actually happening and why, right? And then reasonable people can agree to have different views on that. You can have different tolerances for what the level of public subsidy for your project is. It can go from 0 to 100% on your TIF, right? It can go from 0 to 100% on how you actually redirect any of the additional tax revenues that are coming out of that project. And for everyone that thinks that just saying, well, they're but for taxes, so there's no public policy question here, I mean, that's just insane. All of the history that everyone who's been through redevelopment knows how controversial projects are, and how important it is to make sure you have buy-in at the earliest possible moment from all of your stakeholders. And that's even, acknowledging the fact that now under enhanced infrastructure financing districts, you don't have to take for granted the fact that you have school district money. You don't have that on the table anymore. Right. You can't take for granted you've got the county. You can't take for granted you've got the other special districts. So all the more reason to be really transparent about it. And I think, to your point, the fact that we've been told, as stakeholders, no, as opposed to how can we help mitigate your impacts, is a reflection of the fact that there's this conversation going on that somehow the A's don't have to go through the same gauntlet as everyone else who wants to use this type of financing, as they can just tell people, well, I'm privately, financing my stadium.
Yeah.
Well, okay. If you were building anything under redevelopment, you were privately paying for, name your project. What was the tax increment going to be used for? It was going to be used for the sidewalks. It was going to be used for the sewers. It was going to be used for improving access to your site. It was going to be used for, environmental mitigation. A lot of other things that come with a successful project that aren't that dissimilar from what you would expect from any major development. That could be the case here too. But if you're just going to turn around and label us as liars and misrepresentatives of the truth, because we're actually just regurgitating back the numbers that we're getting from the city. I mean, we're not making this up.
Nope.
But that doesn't mean it's entirely fine to just turn around and label the entire discussion. Again, back to Lauren Taylor. Stupid.
You said something too that reminds me of a point that I find uncomfortable in general with how the mayor has allowed this to be done. And it is that Dave Cowell was quoted, although I don't know if it was accurate, I prefer to see a video, that there's $350 million that was basically unfunded or basically in the hole. And that was at the start of the month of April, around there. Yet, by the time Dave came on my show, which was the 26th of April, he had said they still did not have, and I repeat, they still did not have the subsidy dollar. So if they don't have the subsidy dollar number, A, why would he say what he said? This is something I need to ask him. And B, why didn't the city call him on it? Which to me points to the lack of an actual active, media-friendly and known project manager. You know, I don't know Molly Mayburn. I've got nothing against her. This is not about Molly. This is about the person that's supposed to be in the chair doing the job of actually being the czar of the project. But because of the way the mayor has laid it out, it's not Molly. The mayor has actually prevented Molly from doing that. And, you know, I have to say this, it's going to sound bad, but it is true. Rather than having people that you can point to and say, that person's a specialist and this person has a track record in these areas and we can trust them. In her latest press conference about Howard Terminal, when it hasn't been her, like when she had it out by the water about, I think it was last year,
Right.
All women. And initially I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I realized, wait a minute, none of them have any experience at this. And while I love, you know, my first startup, sports business simulations, all women. My first hire, PR specialist, all the way down, okay? And it was an outstanding staff because it reflected, among other things, what I was used to. But my point is, that's my personal company. And I was getting the best people who I knew who also happened to be female. But Libby structured it for the second time by trying to use these projects to make a statement rather than say, in the Raiders case, for example, that Claudia Capio is the best and the brightest and can handle the issues regarding the Raiders in the NFL. She had zero experience. The NFL said so, although they liked her as a person. It wasn't personal. Again, it's not personal. It's only business. And when I ran into her and Larry McNeil, who was the Raiders point person, and Larry Reed coming out of the mayor's office meeting, this was 2016, excuse me, September, I want to say September, no, July 15, 2016, Claudia had not done the spreadsheet the lot group requested. I, on the spot, offered to do it for her because she didn't know what to do with it. Okay? I can recount story after story after story about how staff was completely out of its wheelhouse in these projects with respect to the maintenance of our sports organizations and the construction of large mixed-use developments. And it feels like to me, Mike, that this is that same thing all over again, where rather than what we used to do, which I think would have served your group better, is to have all the representatives like Gary Schnitzer and all the people that are now characterized to be on the other side, but they're Oakland businesses, right?
Right.
So
right.
should they, you know, I've never seen a situation where they were not at the table until this one and not brought to the table. That's what rankles me. This is not how, well, let me shut up because that's supposed to be your motion. This is not the way things are supposed to be done.
Right. You know, there's definitely a lot of talent at the city that is no longer there. You know, we didn't deal a lot with Claudia, but when we've dealt with her on planning issues, she was fantastic. You know, I just think that there's a lot of institutional memory that is just no longer around just in local government in general, post redevelopment. You know, pretty familiar with the county folks, all the folks that we did a lot of great redevelopment work, housing work, planning work at Alameda County for a long time. They've all retired. They've turned over.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those folks had come from or to the city, and those folks have turned over as well. So, I'm sorry you didn't do very well in your job interview, but they should be hiring, right? I mean, they should be looking for that kind of talent to bring to the table. And I think that comes right back to where we were talking about a lot of the frustration lies here. Not only about just access to information, and that's why, you have to actually have council members that are frustrated enough to say, I want to have an independent analysis of this data when it comes forward. Not only because there isn't transparency about the data, but they don't even trust the ability of the presentation to be reliable enough to withstand a lot of scrutiny. And that's a shame. And I think, it's not unfair of the council. The county supervisors are doing the same thing, right? They're being presented with advocacy as opposed to a real third-party objective arm's length look at these numbers. And that's one of the reasons why, if I'm going to take, the opposite side of my own position a little bit, they should be more candid about what's actually going on. They shouldn't be hiding behind this talking point that it's going to be privately financed. And instead, they should be realistic about, here's how we're going to be doing it. Here's the nature of the public funding and financing, because there are both. And we've talked about this before. Funding and financing are not the same thing. When you use them interchangeably over and over and over again, no one is clear what's being done, right? So even when you talk about the stadium being privately financed, I don't even believe that anymore, because the second you're talking about TIF and you're talking about tax increment financing, there it is. It's a public.
What happens when
the component with respect to what's being publicly funded versus what's being privately funded has never been clear. It's never been daylighted. And if the A's are looking for a property tax subvention, then essentially that's public underwriting. And whether you agree that that's a good subsidy or not, whether you believe that on net it's good for the city and all that, you can't just say, well, this is but $4 and so it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. And that gets back to a lot of I think the response from Dan Kalb, which I think is a reasonable criticism for not voting yes on that measure, which is, I don't know if I'm satisfied with with the deal yet, right? I don't know yet because no one's shown me, which is different than Lauren's criticism, which was, I want all of that in a ballot measure, and basically saying I want a referendum on this thing, which we'd gladly take Councilman Taylor up on. If he wants to promise to do a referendum on any development agreement, we'd be more than happy to have him sponsor that resolution. That would be fantastic.
I'd like to play this for you. I'm pretty certain you haven't seen it before, but it was from town hall meeting that Oakland City Council President Nikki Fortunato Bass held on the 20th of November 2019. And it's about Howard Terminal Park. It's a community meeting. Here we go. Make sure the volume is up right here.
Member Nikki Fortunato Bass and Councilmember Bass, could you tell my viewers how this meeting about Howard Terminal, this community meeting, went from your perspective and what are the next steps? Thank you for your time.
Sure. So this was the first meeting since the Howard Terminal project has been a little bit more developed in Chinatown. It's one of the neighborhoods that is close to the potential ballpark at the Howard Terminal. So we came to Oakland Hotel to participate in a meeting where the Neighborhood Crime Prevention Council typically meets. And the residents here, it was a full house. We got a chance to hear directly from the A's about what the project is about. We had a chance to hear from one of the city representatives about the community benefits process. And I also had a chance to tell people I am committed to keeping the A's in Oakland. And I'm also very committed to making sure that we have a strong community benefits package that addresses the needs of the neighbors that are that are closest to the potential ballpark, and that we do everything to make this the best project possible.
Is there a contact point that viewers would like to know about, or you have for them?
Sure. If folks want to reach out to me, the easiest way is to email me at District 2. That's DISTRICT 2, the number 2, at oaklandca.gov.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thanks, Eddie.
I said
You're
because
afraid.
the one thing that we talked about off camera, and I didn't want to be rude to her and bring it up there, was I wanted to talk to the 90 strong audience about tax increment financing, its role, and how much could be expected given the assessed value level that we were talking about, was roughly $1 billion. Carl Chan stopped me. Veronica, whose last name I forgot, from the city administrator's office, I haven't seen her in years. Even before that point, we had a great conversation. But I said to her, because she agreed with Carl, I said, why do you all not want the audience to know about tax increment financing and the subsidy throw-off? She said to me, and I quote, Zinni, that's a conversation for lunch. What do you think if we had ever had that lunch? She would have said to me.
Well, I think your suspicion about it is going to be mine, which is, they were committed to a narrative, and the narrative is that this is privately financed and there's no public money. Of course, there's public money, there needs to be an honest debate about it, and people need to be able to say what their policy their policy prerogatives are, have a conversation about it. And again, from a lot of those comments, when folks come back and they just say, that this is all the A's money, it just isn't. And there needs to be a very, very honest conversation about what's entailed and why advocates of public subsidies might have good arguments. So, if they're relying on your expertise or your spreadsheets or your history or those of other folks that are like-minded like you, great. If they're folks that are on our side of the ledger, and you heard from a lot of them that are community folks that basically said this is a subsidy for a billionaire, we want him to spend out of pocket, and we want him to make these commitments to community benefits and not pay it out of the general fund, great. That's the conversation that you'd be having. But to just tell people that their opinions don't matter because there's no public money involved, that's just not even true. I mean, it's not even close.
And then I'd like to show you, Mike, this is SB 293 Skinner in its wording. And I'm going to enlarge it a bit, but not too much. It says Senate Bill number 293, Chapter 762, and an act to add Section 53395.822 Government Code relating to infrastructure financing districts. This is by our great state senator, Nancy Skinner. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, and that's too much. Let me go back and adjust that to actual size, and just probably going to have to keep it there. But zoom out. Yeah. And I take you all the way down, folks, to Section 2 and D1, Section 2D1 right here, and I'm gonna line it right there. See that, Mike? That blue part? Okay. It reads as follows: a district like the one we're talking about for Howard Terminal, which would take in tax increment financing, may finance. Listen to this, folks. I want everybody to pay attention to what I'm about to read to you. The design, purchase, construction, I'm going to highlight this whole area. Design, purchase, construction, expansion, improvement, seismic retrofit, a rehabilitation of any real or tangible property with an estimated useful life of 50 years or longer, as described in this chapter. The facilities need not be physically located within the boundaries of the district, which means they could be in East Oakland. However, any facilities financed outside a district shall have a tangible connection to the work of the district, as detailed in the infrastructure financing plan, which we haven't done, adopted in accordance with subdivision E. Subdivision B of section 53395.3 shall not apply to the district, but the district shall only finance public facilities of community-wide significance that provide significant benefit to the district or the surrounding community. And then it goes on to read this. A district shall not finance routine maintenance, repair work, or the cost of ongoing operation or providing services of any kind. Fine. And now, folks, this is an old hat in Oakland. We've actually gotten around this by giving the city of Oakland a loan, and the city then provides the service. So that's the way the district gets away with it. That's an old law. Anyway, it says, in addition to any other project authorized by this chapter, this is the beauty part of it, folks. Pay attention. A district formed pursuant to this section may finance any of the following: highways, interchanges, ramps, and bridges, arterial streets, parking facilities, and transit facilities, sewage treatment and water reclamation plants and interceptor pipes, facilities for the collection and treatment of water for urban uses, flood control levees and dams, retention bases and drainage channels, child care facilities, libraries, parks, recreational facilities, and open space, facilities for the transfer and disposal of solid waste, including transfer stations and vehicles, brownfield restoration and other environmental mitigation, the development of projects on a former military base, provided that the projects are consistent with the Military Base Authority reuse plan and are approved by the Military Base Reuse Authority if applicable. The repayment of the transfer of funds to a military base reuse pursuant to section 67851 that occurred on or after the creation of a different district. And it goes on, folks, further down, which I'll continue to highlight. The acquisition, construction, or rehabilitation of housing, whether publicly or privately owned, for very low income households and persons and families of low or moderate income, as those termed as defined in sections 50105 and 593 respectively of the Health and Safety Code, for rent or purchase. And then M, acquisition or construction or repair of industrial structures for private use. N, transit priority projects as defined in section 21155 of the Public Resources Code that are located within a transit priority project area. For purpose of this paragraph, quote, transit priority project area includes a military base reuse plan that meets the definition of a transit priority project area of or a contaminated site within a transit priority project area. And then O, if the State Air Resources Board, pursuant to Chapter 2.5, commencing with Section 650AO of Division 1 of Title 7, has accepted a Metropolitan Planning Organization's determination that the Sustainable Community Strategy or the Alternative Planning Strategy would, if implemented, achieve the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, projects that implement a Sustainable Community Strategy. F, projects that enable communities to adopt the impacts of climate change, including but not limited to higher average temperatures, decreased air and water quality, the spread of infectious and vector-borne diseases, other public health impacts, extreme weather events, sea level rise, flooding, heat waves, wildlife, and drought. Q, port or harbor infrastructure, you smiling Mike, as defined by section 1698 of the Harbors and Navigation Code. R, the acquisition, construction, or improvement of broadband internet access services as defined in section 53167. Notwithstanding any other law, a district that acquires, constructs, or improves broadband internet access services may transfer the management and control of those facilities to a local agency that is authorized to provide broadband internet access service, and that local agency, when providing that service, shall comply with the requirements of Article 12, commencing with Section 53167 of Chapter 1. And then S, remediation of hazardous materials on or under or around any real or tangible property. T, seismic and life safety improvements in existing buildings. And then U, rehabilitation, restoration, and preservation of structures, buildings, and other facilities having special historical, architectural, or aesthetic interest or value that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places, are eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places individually or because of their location within eligible registered historic district, or are listed on a state or local register of historic landmarks. V, structural repairs and improvements to piers, sidewalls, and wharves, and installation of piles. W, removal of bay fill. X, stormwater management facilities, other utility infrastructure for public space improvements. Y, other repairs or improvements to public facilities. Z, planning and design work that is directly related to any public facilities authorized to be financed by a district. And then that's a gigantic list, okay? And then get this, improvements which may be publicly owned to protect against potential sea level rise, and then of course fire stations. And then it reads, notwithstanding sections 53395.10 to 53395.25 inclusive, the district board may adopt or amend one or more infrastructure financing plans, plural, for the district according to the procedures in this section. The district shall include only those areas which may be non-contiguous, that is, they don't have to be connected, folks. They can be different parts of the city of Oakland, that the district board finds are necessary to achieve the goals of the district as defined in the resolution of intention adopted pursuant to this section. Any district may be divided into project areas, each of which may be subject to district limitations established under this section. The district board may, at any time, add territory to the district or amend the infrastructure financing plan for the district in accordance with the same procedures for the formation of the district and adoption of the infrastructure financing plan pursuant to this section, okay? And so I read all of that to ask you this question. Has anybody presented this to you?
Outside of Senator Skinner? No. And
Nobody.
Nobody.
And Mike, this can get it done, right? It's all here.
Well, let's say.
Okay. Right.
Let's say you wanted to actually have a conversation about the best and highest use of public tax dollars, right? And you were doing it in the context of SB 293. If I were the project proponent, I would look down that list and I would see that you could offer to project opponents ways to generate revenues that solve their issues. So if you look at, last September, we put together a summary of several months worth of conversations that we had with the port on seaport compatibility measures that had not been part of the EIR conversation. And, just looking at two of those, the removal of bay fill and the ability to spend money out of the IFD on building new piers and quay walls and other types of infrastructure like that. One of our asks is we would like this project to help finance the expansion of our inner harbor turning basin. It's specifically laid out there. There's no reason why they can't do that.
Nope.
One of the asks from the trucking industry has been from the very start, please secure other property for us to move our operations if they're displaced from Howard Terminal to somewhere else. They could purchase other property to move that. That is port and harbor supporting infrastructure. They could do that. No offer of that. We've asked for all kinds of different, again, hard infrastructure improvements, including, everything from the additional grade separations that the railroads are asking for, additional separations and traffic improvements for trucks to get in and out of the site without having to mix with cars and fans. But then other things which would address a lot of our issues too, including transit infrastructure. If you have the way that they went through this, if you have letters on your EIR from AC Transit and BART and Capital Corridor, your main transit providers to that site, that all say you have not coordinated with us, you haven't offered us anything, and you're asking us to come up with brand new infrastructure and operational costs that haven't been accounted for, that's a failure to do really, really basic blocking and tackling. And here you are with the keys to do it. I mean, you just read it. It specifically says, if you want to use tax increment financing out of SB 293, you can use it to do these things. So, yeah, back to your question, there is no plan that's been presented to any of us that says, here's the way we're going to work together to get this done. That would be over our objections philosophically to the project, but you still want to get people to a place where your project works at the end of the day.
Quick context. The interview that I showed you with Councilmember Bass, that was at her town hall on the 19th of November 2020. That was just 1 month, roughly, after Gavin Newsom signed SB 293 Skinner into law.
That's right.
So we are sitting there, and the same words that I just read to you, we're sitting there then, and yet nobody presented them.
And they didn't want you to. They didn't want you to talk about it because the narrative, even with the passage of SB 293, was that days were going to be paying for all this. And, that, again, we're just back to the same old.
Right, but the real story is, I have to say this because as the person who, and Dave, say what you will about Dave, but he acknowledges that I'm the person who gave him the idea to use this stuff. Because he didn't have SB 628 deal. He didn't have even the studies that were done by Gruen and Gruen for Let's Go Oakland in 2010. He didn't even know that existed on the 4th of April of 2017 when I presented to him those documents during our phone conversation. I sent him an email, okay? I did it because of this. The enormous assessed value of a stadium gives us this wonderful opportunity to drive this enormous tax increment simply because of the value of the building, even in its base year form, forgetting, the $12 billion build out, right? So when I started running the numbers, I told Dave, you're not going to be able to get this through without affordable housing, and you're going to need redevelopment. You need tax increment financing to build it. You're going to need to fund the subsidy gap. And he agreed with everything that I'm saying.
Yeah.
So my point is
fundamentally right.
Yeah, and my point is that Dave did the smart thing. He took what I gave him, and then he worked with National Security to fashion what was passed. But then the city took it, and they did nothing with it. They talked to no one, no taxing agency. In other words, not the county, not BART, not AC Transit. They didn't even try to make a deal with the school district, even though people say you can't do it. They make deals with anybody. You and I both know that. They could have made a deal with the school district, say, hey, we'll give you $50 million up front if you let us use X amount, right? Do what you want. There's all kinds of deals that could have been done when you're talking about the enormous amount of tax increment revenue that's going to be thrown off just because you're plopping a $2 billion facility onto our landscape. And that's what's lost here.
Right. That's exactly right.
It's a huge amount of money.
Yeah. And we have the same dynamics over on the port side as well. And that's why, we sponsored SB 63 as Isidore Hall bill several years before that to set up a seaport tax increment financing after seaport revenues and infrastructure were left out of originally the original Bell bill, SB 628. So there's power in that leverage, even when it's on property, like the stadium would be, but ours is the same. And it would be, except for the housing, it would be publicly owned, long-term lease revenue improvements. And those possessory interest taxes, the way they get taxed, provide a lot of value up front in year one when you're doing tax increment. So there's absolutely no question that there's a pathway there. But then we're back to where you started, which is who's presented a plan? Who's even set up the district? And the answer is nobody.
No. And get it worse, because Libby didn't start talking to the council, to Alameda County until after Bob Manfred said on the 27th of March of last year, hey, how come this thing is so late? We're going to move to Vegas.
Right. And the secondary component of that is obviously, again, not my position, but if I were the A's and you're looking at that project list under SB 293, which means you can have non-contiguous improvements throughout the city.
Yeah.
Instead of coming in and talking about on-site versus off-site infrastructure and the way that they segregated that, and then have the city come back and say, well, this is the wrong place to, that's the wrong place to go.
Yeah.
I would have walked out and said, here's my plan for, let's do firehouses, doing a firehouse in every, community. Let's do parks. Let's put a park in every, pick your poison out of that list. You could have done it. And that comes back to the fundamental question, I think, of that ballot measure, even if it's inartfully done, even if between council members Taylor and Gallo, you didn't quite get this debate. What do you want to do with the money that are generated from the project? Where do you want it to go, and how much? Do you want it to funnel back into the infrastructure at Howard Terminal, or do you want it to go pay for a park or a firehouse in your community? You don't know. There's no plan. They haven't filed a plan.
And not only that, although I'm not going to take the time to find it because I have so many interviews with him where he said the same thing, but David said on camera more than once, they want to use SB 293 Skinner, and why not? They designed it.
Right. They wrote it.
And so here you have Molly saying we're not going to use it, but then never answering the question, well, what are you going to use?
Right. And we still don't know, whether or not they plan on bonding against it, which I would just be shocked if they didn't. But, if you want to use it for property tax subvention, that just eats into your total revenue. That back ends that revenue. You don't have it up front, which from a capital perspective blows my mind.
Yeah.
Why you would do that. But, I think those are all valid questions. And if we were just kind of break this down and wrap this up, those are the types of things, whether you have a ballot measure or you don't, that have to be fleshed out. They need to be clear. And if they are done in a way which doesn't make sense, doesn't maximize value for taxpayers, the people there were, I don't remember the number off the top of my head that Councilman Gallo used, but over 10,000, maybe as many as
296 projects, $1.5 billion in total value, which, if you think about it, could fall right into SB 293 Skinner and finance TIF easily.
I was going to say, people who were responding to the question of whether or not you wanted a public vote, if you're doing it poorly, you aren't beyond what Lauren Taylor put out there, which was a referendum. So that question is not gone. You're not beyond where Dan Kalb and Sheng Tao went, which was, we're willing to put this on a special election track if you do it poorly. So it is not a slam dunk, and even the folks that didn't express that position very clearly, if the community benefits projects aren't done in a very transparent way, where people feel that it isn't smoke and mirrors, there will be a lot of pressure from the community to go down that path. The way that that's been set up, I don't know if people would feel like they have a good grasp on where their revenue is coming from and in what year, right? If your community benefits process is set up to only be funded by condo transfer taxes or transfer fees that are upon resale and not upon the initial sale of those units, which is what's being proposed.
I don't know how that came about.
You don't know when that's going to happen. There's no way to bond against it, right? You can't get that money up front. You can't underwrite that. And it would be sporadic.
You know what that smells like to me? It smells like, first of all, they didn't do the math regarding TIF, A. B, that somewhere along the way, they let the A's get away with saying we're not going to pay property taxes without understanding that just 1% of the value, which I think, and I've asked Dave about this, he says, no, we'll pay, he finally said we'll pay taxes, property taxes. But what sticks out with us, and Mike, I really think your people need to know what's in SB 293 Skinner. You need to ask the hard question, why is this not being pushed? Because if this were the center from which we acted, as it should be, you all will be at the table with the city, with the A's, and your concerns would have been not only addressed, but financed a long time ago. And by this point, we were already established. In fact, I told Libby in my job interview, I told Libby, look, if you put me in charge of this right now, Ms. Mayor, I would start the Public Financing Authority right now, because we have no way of focusing and organizing this project. It's all over the place. There's no sunshine to point at legally, right?
Right.
But you do it, what I'm talking about, you get sunshine like that.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly right.
And so,
I think we're all on the same page with this, which is there's a lot of value there that is unfortunately not being talked about. There's got to be a reason. I don't know what it is. But if you're not trying to get to yes, when you have the tools to get to yes, that is not a recipe for a less than contentious development. Thanks for the time, Zenny. I appreciate it.
You got it, man. You stick around in the background?
Yep.
Okay. All right, folks. We'll be back with more later. I've got a special dealing on this subject about Howard Terminal. So subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.blog.com. And that ends this broadcast. Michael, stick around in the background.